Well, everybody else might the history of Jamaica on film channel. We never do it on food channel, so we never do it over here, so today. Nothing wrong with that. Some people, they don't have a time for read, or some people don't have a time for them type of vibe about. But I put it out there, because people like listen more time to it, man, more than even reading, so nothing really wrong with that. So we could spell the words them. So what's the history of Jamaica? The history of Jamaica over the past 500 years has been marked by the courage of the Jamaican people in their triumphant struggle for freedom and justice, by their unrelenting resistance and determination in the face of adversity and discrimination. Modern Jamaica is built on a historical legacy of genocide perpetrated against the island's indigenous people, on the experience of over 300 years of slavery and oppression suffered by the Jamaicans of African origins, and on the interplay between Europeans, Africans, Asians, and Middle East in the building of a proud, free, and progressive nation in the heart of the Caribbean. First Jamaicans. The first Jamaicans were the Taino Indians who settled in Jamaica around 600 AD. They were Stone Age people who had migrated to Jamaica from northern coast of South America. After living continuously in Jamaica for almost 900 years, the Tainos were wiped out within 50 years of the Spanish conquest in 1494 due to the exploitation of the Spanish settlers, starvation, and lack of resistance to the European diseases. Many Taínos fiercely resisted the Spanish occupation of their land. Some even committed suicide rather than serve as slaves. The Arawak language spoken by the Taínos survives in many words such as hammock, hurricane, tobacco, barbecue, canoe. The word Jamaica actually derives from the Arawak word ex Amaca, meaning land of wood and water. The Spanish period. Columbus was the first European to set foot on the island when he claimed it for Spain on May the 3rd, 1494. During his second voyage to the New World, Jamaica was settled by the Spanish in 1510, and the indigenous Taino people were forced into slavery, eventually exterminated in the early years of the 16th century, and practice of importing slaves from West Africa to work in Jamaica began. Jamaica's first town was built by the Spanish in St. Anne's Bay and was called Civela Nueva. In 1538, the Spanish moved the capital of Jamaica to Spanish Town. Jamaica was, however, never heavily populated by the Spanish, for they found no gold on the island. Instead, plantations were established to supply food for the Spanish ships that sailed between Europe and the Americas. Spain remained in control of the island for more than 150 years, and the legacy of this period can still be seen in historical buildings of Spanish Town and in many Spanish names assigned to Jamaican rivers, mountains, and towns. The British period and the Pirates of the Caribbean. In 1655, British naval forces captured Jamaica from the Spanish. The British went on to retain control of Jamaica for over 300 years. The British took advantage of Jamaica's strategic location in the center of the Caribbean to challenge the Spanish dominance of the region and to disrupt their lucrative trade in gold and silver. While many of the first English settlers in Jamaica were landowners, others were pirates who operated with consent of British buccaneers like Sir Henry Morgan, joined forces with mercenaries and adventurers to attack Spanish galleons that carried gold and silver from Central and South America to Spain. Their headquarters at Port Royal soon became rich with stolen Spanish gold and was known in the 17th century as the wickedest city in the world. Port Royal was also completely destroyed in 1962 by a devastating earthquake, and further damage by a series of hurricanes over the next 30 years. By then, England and Spain had signed a peace treaty, and the need for the buccaneers had vanished. Jamaica became more involved in trades and exportation of sugar, cocoa, and other agricultural products. The decline of buccaneers, coupled with the destruction of Port Royal by earthquake, led to the rise of the nearby fishing village of Kingston, which offered a natural harbor on the more sheltered southern side of the island. Kingston eventually became Jamaica's capital in 1872. The Maroons. During the upheaval caused by the transition of the Spanish to English rule in 1655, many of the West African slaves formerly owned by the Spanish escaped into Jamaica in the interior and pioneered the resistance to slavery that would continue in Jamaica for most of the ensuing 200 years. These escaped slaves developed their own separate culture based on their West African roots, known as the Maroons. The British were never able to recapture or subdue them, and they were granted political autonomy in 1739. Their descendants and culture still exist today. Modern Jamaica, testament to their skill and tenacity. Africans in the Caribbean, the resistance to slavery. The most important of African slave labor began by Spanish, continued under the British with much greater intensity and grew steadily in the volume as sugar production increased in extent and value. Most Jamaican slaves came from the region of modern-day Ghana, Nigeria, and Central Africa, and included the Akan, Ashanti, Yoruba, Igbo, and the Ibibio people. By the 18th century, Jamaica had become one of the most valuable British colonies, but the conditions endured by the slaves were horrendous. Families were routinely separated, housing and sanitary conditions were abysmal, beatings, tortures were rampant, many died from overwork and starvation. Life expectancy of African slaves in Jamaica was 7 years. Wow, they saw the bitch them wicked. The slave trade was abolished in 1807. By then, almost 2 million slaves were traded to Jamaica, with tens of thousands dying on slave ships in the brutal middle passage between West Africa and the Caribbean. Then, after almost 250 years of rebellion and resistance, emancipation of slavery was finally won in 1838. Over 200 years of inhumane bondage was ended through a fierce resistance of the West African slave, and thanks to the support of the enlightened members of the British Parliament and Christian dissenters from Britain. A great contribution was made also by the Christian missionaries in Jamaica, who treated the slaves as human beings and awakened them to the Christian gospel, in which there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Jesus Christ. The end of slavery brought about the collapse of the plantation system, as the West African slaves who had fought for their freedom were no longer prepared to work for their former masters. This, together with other factors including unemployment, heavy taxation, droughts, processed a crisis in 1865 that challenged the old social and economic patterns decisively and quickly. In October 1865, an uprising known as the Morant Bay Rebellion was put down with terrible severity, and its leaders were hanged. The handling of the crisis by the British governor led to his recall to London, but before leaving he introduced the frightened House of Assembly to vote for its own extinction. In its place, a crown colony form of government, which the governor wielded the only real executive or legislative power, was established by an act of the British Parliament in 1866. Asia and the Middle East in the Caribbean. The Jews were among the first ethnic group to settle in Jamaica, arriving in the early 16th century to work in sugar manufacturing. After completing their period of indentured labor, they moved into businesses and other professions. And although small in number, they still have significant influence in Jamaica in these areas. In 1845, the first Indians arrived in Jamaica to work as indentured servants on sugar plantations that had been abandoned by African Jamaicans after the abolition of slavery. The first laborers came from northern India, but others arrived from Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, the central provinces, Punjab, and the northwest frontiers. In 1854, the first Chinese migrants arrived as indentured laborers. Most were from Hong Kong and from Kwangtung province in South China. In the early years of the 12th century, migrants from Palestine, Lebanon settled in Jamaica, fleeing political and religious persecution in their home countries and in search of a better life and a better way. The people of the Middle East, India and China have retained many of their cultural values from their places of origin and have enriched Jamaica with their contribution to farming, commerce, and other professions, while integrating with their own traditions and expertise in the Jamaican society. Transition to the independence. By 1938, the dissatisfaction with the Crown colony system, sharpened by the hardship and suffering brought by the worldwide economic depression, erupted in serious and widespread rioting. These events resulted in formation of the first lasting labor union, as well as of its political parties linked to them. The growing demand for self-determination also became apparent. Political agitation by Jamaican activists and trade union leaders led to the granting of a new constitution in 1944, providing for a two-party House of Representatives. The appointment of Minister of Universal Adult Suffrage. Further constitutional advances took place in 1953 and 1957. The full external government was obtained in 1959. In 1958, Jamaica became a founding member of the Federation of the West Indies, from which it succeeded in 1961 after a referendum. On August 6, 1962, after 300 years of British colonization, Jamaica became an independent union with full dominion status within the Commonwealth. Jamaican identity. The legacy of Africa lives on in Jamaica in countless ways. It is most evident in the ethnic composition of the Jamaican people, in the Jamaican language called Patois or Patois, whose grammar and pronunciation are heavily influenced by the Twi language. Spoken in West Africa, in Jamaica, music and dance, in religious worship and rituals, and in food and dress. The legacy of Britain also lives on in Jamaica in many ways. For example, English is the official language. Her Majesty, the Queen, is head of the Parliament, well, rest in peace. Jamaica's system of government is based on the Westminster parliamentary model. Jamaica jurisdiction system, the whole jury business, the whole judge and the whole shit like that. Pattern of England same way. Right? Cricket, national sport. You know what I mean? The Jamaican national motto is out of many one people. Reflects the fact that people of different races and creed have lived side by side for centuries to forge a unique Jamaican identity and a common destiny as a nation.